afternoon, evening, whatever time it is in your time zone, for this special presentation brought to you by the Canadian Securities Exchange. We'll be talking about going public in Canada and what that entails. I want to start off by thanking Amanda Munoz and her team at MZ Group for helping us put this together and making sure we've got a room to present to. I'm Anil Mall. I represent the Canadian Securities Exchange. I'm based out of here in Vancouver, and I'm the Director of Listed Company Services. Joining myself today will be Peter Simeon. Peter is a partner at Gowling LLP, which is a law firm, as well as Corey Giasson. Corey is the President CEO of MustGrow Biologics. And gents, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today for this presentation. What we'll do is I will start off with a presentation on the Canadian Securities Exchange, what the exchange is about. We'll go over some of the details that, and then we'll have a small presentation from Peter, a small presentation from Corey. We'll go through some Q&As about going public in Canada, and then we'll open up the room to the audience. We do encourage you, if you have any questions, feel free and type them out in the chat box or in the Q&A section, and we'll do our best to go ahead and answer these questions. Our presentations will also be available for download via the link, and we'll obviously send them off later on. But if you have any questions and you don't want to jump on stream and ask us, feel free and reach out to either of us at your own convenience. We're more than happy to take your phone calls or emails and talk to you about what that process looks like. So without making everybody wait a little bit longer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and present what the CSE is all about. So I'm going to go to the next slide here. So why Canada? Why would companies choose to list in Canada? Well, we have an access to an ecosystem that's oriented to early stage public venture capital. Canada is also home to the most public companies per capita in the world, and it's a platform into the US capital and trading markets. We'll go to the next slide, please. Just going to go over a quick primer about the CSE. We were founded in 2003 and now are well into our second decade of operation. Our national presence is with our headquarters, which is based in Toronto, Ontario. You'll see a picture of our building on this slide. Our mission at the CSE is to provide a modern, disclosure-driven exchange model to facilitate cost-efficient capital formation for public issuers. CSE has been the world's fastest-growing small-cap stock exchange for tech, cannabis, resource, novel industries, as well as emerging markets. In the last little while, we have raised over $8 billion in capital. We've got over 771 listed companies and the exchange market cap of $43.3 billion. Next slide, please. Going to go over a few reasons, 5 reasons to list on the CSE. Reason number 1 would be to collaborate with an exchange that places the entrepreneur's experience at the center of their business model. Access to public capital with no sector limitations is another reason, as well as experience, time, and cost savings as a result of CSE's efficient listing model. You benefit from a global liquidity profile on an established exchange, and companies can also leverage CSE's digital network, as well as our global reputation, to gain investor attention and further leverage your corporate listing. Next slide, please. So in 2021, we listed 182 new companies. I'm just going to go through this quickly. We had about 68 in the resource sector, which is mining, oil and gas, etc. We had 51 in the tech space, and out of that, 7 were clean tech focused companies, 24 in the cannabis space, 16 companies listed in the life sciences. Out of that, 11 were psychedelic focused companies. We had 22 companies listed in the diversified sector, and about 12 of those were in the plant-based food space. We had about 27 IPOs in 2021. We'll talk a little bit about our regulatory framework. So the CSE has 2 principal regulators. One is the OSC, which is the Ontario Securities Commission, and the BCSC, which is the BC, British Columbia Securities Commission. They work in harmony with the AMF and all other provincial securities regulators. And as with all of the Canadian exchanges, national instruments such as the 43101 apply to all CSE listed companies. Timely disclosure policies are all administered by IIROC, and the CSE is a designated stock exchange by the Department of Finance in Canada. We are subject to IIROC monitored trading and a regulation as SEC designated offshore securities market in the United States. Our companies have access to data and trading. So the CSE is fully integrated with professional trading and market information networks in Canada. These include key vendors such as Bloomberg, Reuters, which is Refinitiv, S&P Global, Iris, Morningstar, and more familiar names like Google Finance and Yahoo Finance. Trading is available across all discount trading platforms in Canada. These include Wealthsimple, Desjardins Online, BMO Investor Line, National Bank Direct Brokerage, CIBC Investor Edge, Qtrade, Questrade, and a lot more. CSE listed securities are RRSP and TFSA, which is a tax-free savings account eligible in Canada. They are also eligible for SIPs in the UK and IRAs in the United States. Level 2 trading data is available. You can go to our website, which is thecse.com. Or you can reach out to myself after this presentation. US and international access, which is probably a topic that you're all very curious about. The CSE is recognized, qualified for an exchange in the US by the OTC Markets Group, with over 200 CSE listed securities trading on the OTC QB and the OTC QX markets. Growing direct access to the exchange from the US and internationally through interactive brokers, which is mainly for the large issuers and other institutional and retail-oriented brokers in the US as well as Europe. There are companies interlisted with NASDAQ, the Equus Exchange in UK, the LSE, and Frankfurt Bourse. So a very quick primer on the CSE. So I'm sure if you have more questions, like I mentioned, I'm the Director of Listed Company Services based here in Vancouver. You can feel free and reach out to us at your convenience, and we're more than happy to take your calls or emails. Also, we've got a good presence across all social media channels you'll see on the screen here. Feel free and obviously take a look at our YouTube channel, which is CSE TV, and follow us on other social media channels to keep up with some of our events. That's the presentation from the Canadian Securities Exchange. I don't want to take up too much time here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually pass the virtual microphone over to Peter Simeon. And as I mentioned earlier, Peter is a partner with Gowling LLP. Peter, it's all you.
Thanks, Anil. We do lots of transactions with the CSE. We've listed, probably hundreds of companies there. It's a great exchange, very business focused, very commercial and practical. We love working with the CSE. As Anil said, I'm a partner at Gowlings. I've been practicing law about 20 years, focusing on, corporate finance and capital markets. I take companies public. I list them on stock exchanges. We do a lot of public and private M&A where clients are buying, companies are selling companies. Also do a lot of financing work where we're raising capital for clients, either when they're private or after they're public. A little bit about Gowling. So Gowling WLG is a large international law firm. We have offices all across Canada. We have offices in Europe and in Asia. We're fairly industry focused at our law firm, and we have a lot of different practice areas. Other than what I do, we're known for our IP group, our litigation group, as well as the corporate group, which is what I do. I'm going to be talking about going public in Canada. Just keep the presentation quick. Keep it high level, and then we can get into some questions. Next slide. So there are three main methods of going public in Canada. The first is an IPO, or initial public offering, and this involves filing a long-form prospectus. The second is a reverse takeover of a shell company. And the third is a direct listing by way of non-offering prospectus. And I'm going to just walk through each of these three ways. Next slide. So an IPO. Issuers need to prepare a preliminary prospectus, which gets reviewed by the Canadian securities regulators and the stock exchanges, although the exchanges tend to rely on the regulators when you're doing a prospectus versus when you do an RTO and you're doing a listing statement. The prospectus needs to include full, true, and plain disclosure of all material facts relating to the securities offered and the company. Usually you file the preliminary prospectus, you get comments back from the regulators, you address those comments, and then you file, a final prospectus. There's always an underwriter that's involved, and they, market and sell the securities. They will do full sort of diligence on the company. You'll have auditors involved. They'll do financial statements and sign audit opinions. So it's a fairly long process. So the waiting period is sort of in between when you file your prelim and after you get your final. People typically are marketing in that period and raising the funds. You then get a final prospectus, and you can proceed then to close your IPO and list on the stock exchange. It is a lengthy process. Like most, IPOs will take, at least 6 months, in my opinion. Some take a year. Preparing financial statements is a time-consuming process. You need that for any of these ways of going public, but just the scrutiny on a prospectus, I think, is a bit more so from a diligence prospectus, because it has to have sort of full, true, and plain disclosure. Next slide. A reverse takeover. So this is when a shell company, and there's no real shell companies on the CSE, but there are, I think, companies that have limited operations or failed businesses, and they will acquire a private company. You will need shareholder approval of, of that shell company to do that RTO transaction. The shares usually get halted in that period where you announce the deal before closing. There's no prospectus. The securities regulators don't review, the listing statement or the filing statement. The stock exchange does, but the stock exchange will provide, their comments on the disclosure document. We'll have to address those. The statements also have to, the listing statement has to contain full, true, and plain disclosure. And if you do have a financing or agent involved, you will have diligence there as well. On other exchanges, we'll sort of remain nameless for this presentation, but there are other ways of doing it, through CPCs, G Corps, SPACs, etc. But an RTO, reverse takeover, is the most popular method of going public in Canada. It's sort of the way most people choose to go public. Next slide. So the last way is a direct listing, and this way is is a bit different than an IPO in that there's no real underwriter or agent involved, but you are filing a prospectus, but it's a non-offering prospectus. So the regulators will review that, they'll comment on it, but typically it's, I think, less of a review and a timeline than if you're filing an offering prospectus. You're actually offering securities under the prospectus. You need to sort of, the sort of drawback here is that there's no distribution. When you do an RTO with the shell company will have, at least the 150 or 200 sort of shareholders needed to meet minimum listing requirements on a stock exchange. When you do a direct listing, you don't have that. So you'll have to make sure you sort of build that into your cap structure in advance. But the benefits are, they are sort of less costly, less timely, more efficient than a traditional IPO. And you don't give up the dilution you would give up on an RTO, where you have to give, the shell a piece of that sort of resulting issuer. So we are seeing a lot of clients do a direct listing as well. They want to save that dilution. Next slide. So as I said, sort of the most common method of going public in Canada is through an RTO. This is, how most companies get listed, and you acquire all the securities of that private entity, and you'll list that resulting issuer. Interestingly enough, the CSE was one of the only stock exchanges, and early on was frankly the only stock exchange that allowed sort of cannabis companies to get listed in Canada. So that was one differentiation feature. As in we're talking to a lot of Brazilian companies here, as an emerging markets type country, if you have sort of other issues, you want to address those early. It sometimes takes longer to clear PIFs or have background checks done for emerging markets. And again, sometimes describing sort of foreign companies and dealing with either sometimes opinions or other things are needed. You want to sort of get in front of that early. So that's something to think about. Next slide. It's just so I'll finish with sort of, not to the general description, but more the advantage, disadvantages of each of the three types, because I've already described them. So on an IPO, the advantage is you will have a big splashy type, going out party with an IPO. It gets in front of the most amount of people. It attracts a lot of retail investors. You get the most amount of attention generally. The disadvantages are like you will have it take a lot more longer. It'll be a lot more scrutiny. It'll cost a lot more money than other ways of going public. But obviously, an IPO is still an IPO, and people that want to, splashy sort of transaction or have a larger market cap will choose to do that. An RTO is, as I said, the most common way of doing it. It's shorter. You can do it in as quick as 3 months, sort of 4 or 5 months usually. The diligence tends to be a bit simpler than it would be on an IPO. The disadvantages are you're typically sort of raising capital through a secondary or private placement or sub-receipt transaction that's not under the prospectus. You will have to pay something for the shell. So as I said, you're sort of diluting your company a bit. Shells are going for $750 to $1 million plus cash. So it's actually a fair bit of dilution depending on how large your company is. And then you're inheriting sort of the shell, right? So you're getting sort of warts and all, as we like to say. All of its prior history, its liabilities, et cetera, are going to come through in transaction versus just your company. And so then the direct listing is kind of a bit of both, right? It is from an advantage side. It is a little bit easier in that you're not doing a full-blown IPO. You're sort of dealing with just describing your company and what comments on that. And you will not have that dilution, which I said before, which is great. But on the disadvantages, you are dealing with a stock. You're not just dealing with a stock exchange. You're dealing with the securities regulators, and they will review your prospectus, and you will need to, find that additional, amount of board lots and shareholders, I said before. So, next slide. That's sort of it on my presentation. Those are the 3 main ways of going public. Sort of pros and cons of each, and we see different clients depending on their business needs choose one or the other. Although I still think an RTO is the most popular, although we are seeing more direct listings in the last couple of years we've seen before that.
Thank you, Peter. We'll move on next to Corey Giasson. Corey is the president CEO of MustGrow Biologics Corp, which trades on the CSE under the symbol MGRO. Corey, all you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. We're an ag biotech company based in Canada. We've been public on the CSE since July 2019, and our method of going public was the direct listing version, and it's been great. So we'll get right into our presentation. I'll tell you a little bit about MustGrow and some of the reasons why we did go public. So if we flip over to slide number 2, the disclaimer, your typical forward-looking disclaimer. I'm going to be making forward-looking statements here, and it can be read in detail on our website at mustgrow.ca. We'll go to the next slide about our company. So we're an ag biotech company, a pre-revenue company with a natural organic technology platform that is highly efficacious at controlling diseases, pests, and weeds. We have a natural way to help farmers grow crops. It's a sustainable innovation with the potential to replace synthetic chemicals. It's a plant-based. Anil mentioned there are some plant-based companies on the CSE. I didn't realize that. Ours is plant-based, not to eat necessarily. It's derived from food-grade mustard, but it's more for use of the compounds within to help protect these crops so that they can grow. It's sustainable, positive soil health and ecological impact, which is very important in the market today. It's one of the reasons why we are public. We feel that our technology has got a great fit for the market, and investors are interested in this type of technology. I mentioned we went public in July 2019, but for probably about 9 years prior to that, there was a lot of work done on this technology, a lot of money spent. I estimate about $9 million Canadian, over 110 independent studies that showed that the technology was very efficacious at controlling the diseases and pests. But the issue was back in about 2015 timeframe, the company ran out of money. So we had to find a new way to raise money, and that was going through the public realm. And you can see there, we've got a very tight capital structure, 49 million shares outstanding, 55 fully diluted. That's very important to us. and we're fortunate to be sitting on $9.3 million of cash on hand. That is a significant amount of money for an early stage company like ourselves. And that doesn't include the money that our global partners are now starting to spend. We've got partnerships with Sumitomo, Bayer, and Nexus Bioag, which I'll get into here shortly. The key market drivers here are agriculture. We're helping farmers grow crops. They're going to need, we're going to need more and more food with a growing population, and there's a finite amount of arable land. And now with some synthetic chemicals being banned, farmers are missing a tool that they've used in the past to help protect these crops, and that's what we're bringing to the market. We're helping to provide that solution. It's a very innovative technology. It's very unique. We're basically extracting what nature's provided the mustard plant and providing it in a commercial form. And we feel that this story here fits very well in the public realm. As I mentioned, our technology is very unique. So compared to synthetic chemicals, it is just as effective, but is also safe. We're derived from food grade mustard. You eat it. When we have wasabi up here in Canada, it's actually it's crushed mustard seed and food coloring. So the active compounds are being released in our mouth, whether we know it or not. But compared to biologics, other biological products out there on the market, which are safe, the efficacy hasn't been met with them. And what we're seeing is that we're kind of unique in a sense that we are safe, we're natural, we're organic, but we have the efficacy of synthetic chemicals, and that's really key. That's what we're bringing to the market. And some of the news announcements that we've provided over the last few years, being a public corporation, that's drawn a lot of attention to our company. We've had success in, say, bananas in Colombia, or in canola up here in Canada. So we've been able to partner with some key ag players, which is very important. It's allowed us to go global. Bayer was our recent announcement. We're partnered with them in Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. And that is to do field development work and help push our technology forward to commercialization. With Sumitomo, we're partnered in the Americas, and Nexus Bioag, we're partnered with them on 2 important Canadian crops, canola and pulses. But in any event, we've taken a small team, made it a lot bigger. We have a lot more expertise on the R&D side, on the regulatory side, and pushing our technology through to commercialization. So we've got some excellent partnerships, and I believe part of this came through being a public company and making our company more aware in the public markets. When we originally started the restructure here and taking the company public back in July 2019, we were really focused on the top part of this technology platform, focused on fruit and veggies, specifically in the US. And that's where we're currently working on getting our registration right now. But since then, we've raised a significant amount of capital that's allowed us to expand our technology pipeline and do testing in more areas. We've done testing in bananas in Colombia on Fusarium wilt TR4. We're testing canola and pulse crops here in Canada on 2 hard-to-kill diseases, clubroot and Aphanomyces. We've come up with another extract, a bioherbicide extract called thiocyanate, that potentially could be used as a non-selective herbicide. And we're now going to be focusing in even more on the post-harvest side, food preservation side, for stored potatoes, bulk grains, et cetera, et cetera. So our company's gone from, I believe, when we originally did the IPO, we were about a $7 to $10 million Canadian market cap to almost $200 million market cap. Agriculture's a big sandbox. We're talking about multiple billions of dollars of fumigate or chemical sales annually in these areas. So we're excited to be in the sustainable agriculture space here right now. This is a snapshot, our last slide, sorry, I should have mentioned on slide number 8. This is a snapshot of our capital structure. Over the last year, you can see we've had a pretty good momentum being an sustainable agriculture company. We've got a very tight capital structure, which we feel is very important. Average volume on the CSE over the last 3 months is 65,000 shares per day. That's come off slightly, but there's also been a slight downturn in the technology space in that. So, and again, the key for us is the cash position, $9.3 million. we wouldn't have been able to raise that money as a private company, and that's why we went public. So thank you very much for allowing us to present.
Thank you very much, Corey. So you've now heard the three presentations. Obviously, the Canadian Securities Exchange presentation, the presentation from Peter Simeon talking about Gowlings and their role within this ecosystem, and then Corey Giasson from MustGrow Biologics talking about the angle and viewpoint of a public company that's actually listed and trading. So we're going to move on now to sort of some questions that we'll be talking about based on some of the points that both Peter and Corey have already touched on. So we'll dive into them a little bit more, but to our viewers, if you do have any questions, if you're curious about something, feel free and jump in with your comments or questions, because we can take them at the same time as well. I think that will make for a much engaging and a better discussion that we're having. Now, obviously, we've all touched on this topic of going public. When it comes to entrepreneurs and early stage companies, everybody has individual requirements on why they choose to go public. So Peter, do you mind maybe touching in on some of the strategies that are taken, or let's say why an entrepreneur and a company would choose to go the public route?
Yeah, I think there are two main reasons you see why people choose to go public. One, as Corey said, is access to capital. It's a lot easier to raise money as a public company, or if you've got a plan to go public. You know, a lot of people don't want to just invest in private companies.
Yeah.
And then two is just liquidity for shareholders. A lot of times shareholders that come in early on at some point want some liquidity, and it's, you know, it's tough for them to sort of sit in a private company for too long. They want some exit at some point. Those are the two main reasons.
Yeah. Corey, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, those were the two main reasons for us. But I'd also add, you know, to help get exposure and to get your story out there. And that, as I mentioned, we've got partners now, and you know, I think that was able to come about because we're making announcements in their industries and that. So.
I think you touched on a great point there, Corey, because, you know, it's very important to be able to meet those milestones and build shareholder confidence. And then, you know, creating awareness for your story, because no matter how good your product or company is, if the general street or capital markets do not know about it, it's very hard to then gain traction while you're out there trying to raise capital.
Exactly.
Now, you know, obviously, Peter, you touched on this earlier. There are several advantages and disadvantages to listing and going public. You know, future raises is one of them, which is an advantage because you have more access to raising capital. You have improved public awareness, which, Corey, you touched on. Let's talk a little bit about, you know, a public company being then able to acquire talented staff and getting out there. Do any of you have to add, have anything to add to that? Corey, maybe you can touch on this one, because
well, we're run pretty lean. There's not very many of us, so we're actually leveraging our partners' know-how and expertise in that, and that's, I think, really key. So I really don't have any expertise in that area. So.
What about acquisitions, being able to then go out there and acquire more and do some M&As and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't focused on that ourselves to date, but I mean, obviously, to be able to do those acquisitions, you know, you need to either have capital, or you need to be able to issue shares to be able to do those types of deals and all that. And it's a lot easier to do that as a public company, and that for sure.
And I know we've touched on the advantages, but it's only fair if we talk a little bit about the disadvantages as well, that individuals and companies will come across when they go through that listing and becoming a publicly traded company. Obviously, Peter, you touched on this earlier in your presentation, that there's increased scrutiny. There's a lot more, you know, regulations and disclosure that you have to follow. You want to maybe talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people going into the process understand the amount of work it takes to get public. And frankly, you know, as a CEO or CFO, you're going to focus so much of your attention on the going public process, the disclosure documents, that you want to make sure someone else in the company is running the business. Like I've seen a lot of clients sort of lose track of their business a bit as they're going through this process because it's hard to focus on both at the same time. And just getting in front of some things, like an audit takes a lot longer than you think. It's one of the first things I ask clients when they say they're ready to go public. Like, you have audit financial statements? Because it takes a lot longer than you think.
I think that's one of the most important things, like you mentioned, Peter, because it's almost a secondary thought at times, but in order to move forward to get a public listing, that is the most important step that you need to have in order is your audits. Now, there's obviously regulatory oversight that you have to worry about. There's a little bit of reduced management control also that comes when you then decide to go ahead and list. You want to maybe touch on that?
Yeah, well, when you're a public company, you obviously will have a board of directors. There's independence requirements for that board, for the audit committee on certain stock exchanges. So you will have more oversight on management. It's not sort of one entrepreneur with, either shareholders that are tightly bound to a shareholders agreement or other things. Shareholders that can buy stock in the market, they have a big enough position, requisition meetings and things. Like, you have to actually be a little more accountable to your shareholder base as a public company. And you've got more fiduciary obligations, like the board and management have fiduciary obligations to their shareholders. You have to think about what's in the best interests of the company and your shareholders, which is different when you're just one or two people at a private company, right?
Yeah. Now, obviously, there's equity dilution when you're going out there and raising capital. Those are all things that individuals and entrepreneurs should definitely pay attention to before they go through that process of listing. Not every time is it right for you to go public. It's all about timing. Now, let's talk a little bit about timing. Corey, I'm gonna jump at you for this one. So, going through the process and listing MustGrow and going public, what are some of the key factors when it comes to timing and having the right timing?
Oh, it's a great question. I wish I knew. I think it's more luck than anything. We have a technology that we believe in, and we think that it needs to be commercialized for the betterment of mankind. We need to be able to grow food sustainably. It's good for the soil. It's good for people. It's good for workers. It's good for people that eat food. So we believe in it. We know it works. We need capital. We need help to go and get it there. And it just so happens that we hit it good timing. Sustainable agriculture is becoming more and more important. And it's a forefront right now. And I believe it's not going away because, you know what, I'm going to go eat tonight and I'll eat tomorrow too. In terms of the timing thing, we got lucky in that, but it's an important factor for sure.
I want to talk to you while we have you up here. Let's talk about your experience. What was it like for you and your team as you were going through that listing process? Was it an easy sort of turnover, or were there hurdles that you and your team had to jump through that you might not have been aware of before you began that process?
I think we have good advisors around us. We've got a good legal counsel that's been there, done that. Same with on the audit side. My CFO, Todd Lottie, he's been involved in IPOs on the NASDAQ in the past. So we've got a lot of good expertise in-house. It's never going to happen as quickly as you want, and that was for sure. It's important to have a good surrounding cast to help get there. And I agree with that. It does take up more of your time as a CEO, and you have less time focusing on operations. So it's important to have help around you so that you don't drop the ball in operations and all that kind of stuff. So
you said it well, Corey. Having the right team and the right people surrounding you as you go through this process is very important. Peter, do you have anything to add to that? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, it always takes longer than you think. Like, it'll always take longer. It'll be more work than you think. And sometimes some things are out of your control. For instance, you're trying to raise capital. Sometimes there's a market window that opens and sometimes it closes. And sometimes, your underwriters or bankers will tell you, like, today's not the day to go public and raise capital. Wait 6 months, wait 3 months. Like, a lot of it is luck, as Corey said. It's sort of catching a window and then getting public in that window. So just prepare enough in advance, and then when the timing is right, you can strike, right?
Now, want to actually jump into the topic of IPO versus RTO. I know both of you touched on this a little bit. Peter, you mentioned that in your presentation, quite a few companies will choose to go that RTO route to have a shorter time to then list and begin trading. Corey, you mentioned that MustGrow decided to go the direct listing route. Can you maybe talk to us about your strategy behind going and doing a direct listing?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it has to do with risk, and that we wanted to be successful, and we didn't want, our technology probably at the time wasn't that well known, or maybe not at the forefront. Being a sustainable agriculture company, technology company. Whereas if we were maybe Facebook, that would be a totally different situation, and that you're hitting it at the, and Peter, you can talk about this better than I can, but to me, it was risk reward, and to what we've seen is the direct listing was the least risky route for us.
Yeah, I agree. Unless you're, a really large company with, like $1 billion type market cap, like an IPO doesn't tend to make sense from a cost perspective. It gets very costly, and you don't really need it to access the capital markets in Canada. And most people, when you tell them you're doing an RTO, like, they understand what that means. That's how most companies get public in Canada. So, will we do some IPOs? Yes. And last year, there was sort of a slew of tech IPOs. Is a bit unusual. But traditionally, you're doing more RTOs, and that's the way people tend to go public. So unless you really want that big, flashy, IPO, unless you're Facebook or a really large company, most clients we advise either the RTO or the direct listing approach.
Peter, you touched on this earlier in your presentation as well about being very careful when you are doing the RTO route and using a shell. Let's talk about some of the hurdles that companies can and sometimes have come across when using a shell.
Yeah, a lot of times there's liabilities you don't know about. Like, you got to do your diligence. You got to go look at their financial statements, like what liabilities are out there, deal with any creditors. Like, I've never seen a going public transaction that, someone didn't put their hand up at some point looking for something, right? So you're going to find some stragglers on an RTO that are, either from the past, or they're looking for, some cash because there's money on the table all of a sudden. So you want to do your diligence and make sure you can minimize that. But there'll always be some element of that, to be honest.
There's always, you're very right about that. And again, you have to remember you're dealing with past shareholders of a company that's no longer active. And these shareholders might just be looking for an easy way out. So here you are, as you're building momentum for your brand new listing, you're almost swimming against the tide, and have shareholders that might be working against you while you're trying to get more awareness and momentum during the first couple of weeks of trading. I think that's a very important point to bring up as well. Now, Corey, I want to talk a little bit about, obviously your company, MustGrow, has been listed since 2019. I think you mentioned July of 2019. So you've had now a good amount of time in the public market. So maybe can you talk to the audience about what your and your team's experience has been like as a company that's navigating the public markets, and then as a company that's listed on the CSE? How's that experience been?
Yeah, I mean, it's been great, to tell you the truth. You're always kind of worried about it, in a sense. I mean, being a technology company, we also have to be careful about the information that we're putting out there. We're pre-revenue. We don't have, you want to update the shareholders on certain things, but there's certain things that we can't be discussing or updating, and that. So you got to, the difference between that and a private company is, we've noticed that some things that we have to hold the cards close to us for certain stuff, say patents, applications, or what have you. And I think the CSE has been a really good place for us to list. I think you guys hit it the nail right on the head there at the beginning. As we're entrepreneurs. We don't want to get bogged down with regulatory and stuff like that. And in terms of being public, we want to be public. We want our shareholders to have access to liquidity and be able to trade their shares. But we create value by focusing on our technology and taking that to commercialization. And as entrepreneurs, I believe the CSE has really allowed us to do that.
Well said, Corey. Peter, I'm not sure if you have anything to add to that, but from a public company point of view, but I'm sure you've got clients that you've brought on board to the CSE. I'm sure they give you feedback. What's that been like, the sentiment of being a company listed on the CSE?
Yeah, all my clients have nothing but positive things to say. Like the CSE is an entrepreneurial type of exchange. It's very practicable and commercially driven. You can always pick up the phone. I do it all the time. I'll call, Mark or Rob, and in their listing group, and just ask them questions. Hey, I looked at your rules. I have a client. They're looking at doing this. How can we get through it? How do we structure it? Like they're very open to having those discussions and trying to create, solutions, not sort of problems. So most of my clients really love the CSE and listing there.
Perfect. Now I wanna actually get into this small little discussion about some of the common mistakes that companies make when they decide that they want to go public. Peter, I'll start with you on this one. I think you've touched on a few points already. Obviously, having their audits in order is the most important one, but I'm sure there's others you can add to as well.
Yeah, I think, the audit's done and worked on properly in advance time is number one. Two, I think, is just getting your company ready to get diligence properly, like having a good data room set up, all your material contracts in one place, where whether you have an underwriter, whether it's opposing counsel for the shell, someone can look at that and review that all. Those are the two biggest ones.
Corey, is there any hurdles, any mistakes that you're able to talk about? Maybe from experience, maybe not from experience.
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's been any mistakes. I guess we'll find out someday. But I think one of the things that's been so important to us is to maintain a very tight capital structure, and we've been able to do that. That's very important to us, as I've mentioned. And I think the other thing is the access to capital. The old rule of thumb is if somebody wants to give you money, and you take it as a small, junior, micro stage company, and capital is so important, and we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing here right now without it. So being able to structure everything properly, we believe, maybe I don't know if we're right or wrong, but it's been very important for us to raise that capital.
Well said, Corey. Thank you. So we, at this point, I do want to remind the audience members, if you have any questions, any comments, anything you might be curious about, feel free and jump into that chat column or in the question and answer box and ask us these questions while we're here. We're always available at a later date if you want to chat on a more sort of personal way, but there are a couple of questions that have come in from the audience, and so I'll direct them over here. Let me just see what these questions are. So this one comes to you, Corey. So what benefits MustGrow is seeking based on competitors, suppliers located in current Europe war zone? I'm not sure if you want to take that one on screen, but you can always email them as well. If you have something to input to that one, feel free.
Yeah, well, so we're working with Bayer in Europe here right now. I'm not sure if there's what we're doing in Ukraine, probably nothing right now. But we don't have a commercial product there. We think our technology will fit in the European Union as a whole. They're very, very, the regulatory area there is very strict in terms of the chemicals that are being used. A lot of them have been banned. So how are farmers going to grow crops? We think our technology has a good fit there. And, with the unfortunate events happening in the European war zone, it's bringing to the forefront food security and how important it is. And, the Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, just like where I'm from here, Saskatchewan is as well. So it's very important that, this war comes to an end and they can start growing crops again to help feed the world. So.
Well said, Corey. So that was the question from the audience. If there are any more questions, feel free and jump in. We've got about 15 minutes remaining. I don't really want to end this a little bit early, but you've had a chance to listen to 3 different viewpoints. Obviously, myself, from the standpoint of the Canadian Securities Exchange, which is a stock exchange here in Canada. You've heard from Peter Simeon. He's a lawyer with Gowlings, talking about, going through the process and what companies need to have in order. And then obviously from Corey, the viewpoint of a publicly listed company that's already trading on the CSE and has gone through that process. So if there's any further questions, I would encourage you all to, send them our way. We're here to answer them. If not, we encourage you to reach out to us at your own convenience by either email or phone call. We've got all our contact details there. Feel free to reach out anytime. We're more than happy to answer any questions, walk you through what that process of going public looks like. And obviously, I want to thank each and every one of you that has taken the time this afternoon to join us to find out a little bit more, not only about the CSE, but also Gowlings as a law firm and MustGrow Biologics as a publicly traded company under the symbol MGRO on the CSE. So maybe we'll give it a couple of minutes, see if there's any questions. If not, what we'll do is I will just go to each of you, Peter and Corey, for a closing remark.
Yeah, happy to. Well, there's a question just popped up.
There is a question that popped up. I guess, don't be shy, everybody watching. Feel free to jump in. So this question is, how is the communication with retail investors and their activity in the CSE? Corey, do you want to take this one?
Sure. I think we've probably done about 4 or 5 take stocks with the CSE, over the last 2.5 years. These are presentations to prospective investors. I think they're probably about 7 or 10 minute presentations. They've been excellent. So the CSE has really allowed us to be able to communicate with our shareholders, and they've been excellent. I will also mention too that there is, just because you become a public company doesn't mean that you're going to get liquidity right away. That needs to be earned. You need to get out there in front of retail investors, institutional investors, etc. You got to go and tell your story, tell about your company, and that helps create the liquidity in that, which is so important. That's one of the reasons why you are public. You want to create that liquidity for your shareholders, and the CSE definitely helps us do that.
Great points, Corey, and thanks for that CSE plug. Based on that, I will jump in here as well. The CSE is very proactive when it comes to making sure that the retail audience and the audience in general has a good knowledge of companies that are trading on the CSE as well as other exchange, various sectors. So what I would suggest for the person that asked that question, and to anybody watching, take a look at CSE TV. It is our YouTube channel. And over the last little while, we've been doing a lot of virtual content that we've been producing in-house, like Mining Over Canada series, the Investing in Psychedelics series, plant-based protein food series, gaming. And what we do there is we will try and bring together not only centers of influence within these various sectors, but also public companies that are in this space to talk about, some of the advantages, the disadvantages, the trends that they might be seeing. So the CSE is very proactive when it comes to getting out there and making sure that not only are we bringing companies to the market, but then we're also going out there and telling their story to the general public as well. So that's CSE TV. This broadcast will also be available on there for replay. So take a look at that. If you have any feedback for us, let us know. We have a podcast that we do. We also put together a virtual and print magazine that highlights various sectors of companies listed on the CSE. So take a look at that. Our latest issue is based on plant-based foods. It's quite an exciting issue. Now, Peter, there is another question that has come in, and this one looks like it's for you. Are there things that Gowlings looks for in taking on an international client? And are there law firms in Brazil Gowlings would work with?
Yeah, so I don't think we have sort of formal criteria. We do have a broad range of clients. We act for small startup companies all the way to, billion-dollar public companies. So it is a broad range, and we're not going to turn a client away because they're too small. I've grown with a lot of my clients. I love seeing small companies that are ideas started in people's, basements turn into large public companies. Those are the funnest stories. I like to work with companies that have interesting ideas and cool products. We don't have an office in Brazil, but we definitely have go-to law firms we've used in Brazil. And if people need a recommendation, happy to give one sort of offline. But depending on the size of the company, what they're looking to do, we have sort of 3 or 4 different kind of firms we use in Brazil.
Thank you for that, Peter. Now, Corey, we've actually got another question that popped in for you. This is actually a really interesting one because it asks, how important is the role of investor relations in getting your story out? And can companies work with more than one IR company? So for example, having an IR company based out of Canada, where you are, and then another one in Brazil or elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned before, one of the most important things for our company is to create liquidity for our stock, so shareholders can buy and sell. You know, and then that is done through IR. IR might be the second most important thing after operations, and that because it does start with an asset. So you know, we do a lot of work in that area. Our goal is to get our story out, you know, update existing shareholders, and then try to tell our story to potential prospective new shareholders, and that. And if they want to invest, great. If not, well, you know, look forward to getting more information from us in the future potentially. So it's very important about using more than one IR company. We don't really use an IR company. We kind of have it in-house, but we use a variety of different marketing groups and all that to get our story out, you know, in different regions. You know, in Canada, here in the US, you know, that's a large market that we're focusing in on, obviously, and internationally. We've got a listing on the Frankfurt Exchange. You know, we get our information translated into German so that it can be marketed there, and that. So it's a very important area.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Corey. We've got a question that's come in. What are your main requirements to get listed with the CSE? Peter, I'll jump into this one, and then if you have anything to add to it, feel free. So listing on the CSE, obviously, the most important thing is making sure you have your books and your audits in order. But once you submit an application, there's an initial listing fee, which depends on the company. It's roughly between, let's say, 15,000 Canadian dollars to about 20,000 Canadian dollars. You then pay an annualized fee, which is roughly around between, let's say, 10 and 18,000. Companies on the Canadian Securities Exchange, once they list, they will pay a monthly listing fee, which is around $1,000, depending on market cap size. And then, you know, obviously, we don't charge any annual fees. There's no transactional fees as you do it. So basically, those are the general costs to get listed on the CSE, which I've just answered. But the main requirements would be to make sure you have your audits in order, you submit an application or a prospectus, and then making sure you've got 2 years working capital, enough to supplement your business for the next at least 2 years. Peter, do you want something to add? Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I guess the only other additional requirement, I think, is the public board lots, right? You're gonna need 150 shareholders holding, you know, at least a board lot. But it doesn't make sense for every company to go public. It is costly. There's a lot of regulatory, you know, compliance you need to do. You need to file quarterly and annual financials. There's a CSE monthly report you do. You know, stock options, RSUs, like a lot of filings get made. There's lots of compliance. So you know, you need to be, I think, of a big enough size, or at least raise enough capital that you can pay for all that and hire the right teams to take care of it.
Yeah, well said. Now, we're very close to our cutoff time at 1 p.m. So if there's no more questions, what I would encourage is feel free and reach out at your own convenience to either of us, either Peter from Gowling's, Corey from MustGrow, if you want some feedback on what that process of listing on the CSE out here in Canada looks like. I do want to give a special shout out and a thank you sincerely to Amanda Munoz and her team, Leticia, as well as Clara, who've helped us on behind the scenes to help put this together. They are all with MZ Group, which is based out of Brazil. And then on the CSE's front, I do want to thank Barrington Miller, who's helped out with this from day one. Katrina, who is with Sparks, to make sure that we've got all of the content, that we get the right people in the room, as well as James Black, who's helped with a lot of other stuff on the back end. So I want to thank each and every one of you that is not on camera, that has helped to make this presentation happen. And of course, Peter and Corey, for your time this afternoon to join myself and help educate and talk to the audience about a possible listing in Canada. Again, we do encourage you all to reach out to us at your own convenience. Our contact details are all available, as well as the presentations that we shared today are available for you to download at your own convenience. Any last remarks, gents?
Yeah, I just want to thank, Anil, and thank the CSE and MZ for inviting me to this presentation. It's been great. We give a very high level overview, but the actual requirements are pretty technical. So if people have real questions, let me know and we can walk through some of the more technical aspects.
Thank you, Peter. Corey?
Yeah, Neil, thanks for inviting MustGrow to present. It's actually was a pretty good process to take a look back at over the last 2.5 years and to see, remember why we actually went public and all that and all this, and take a look at the past. So it was great. Thank you.
Perfect. And again, thanks for everyone that took the time to join us. We look forward to hopefully having you participate again in the next presentation that we do. And maybe that one will be in person out in Brazil next year. Thank you.